So how are Canadian businesses reacting to the idea that some tariffs will likely stay in place? Matthew Holmes is the Executive Vice President and Chief of Public Policy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the program, Matthew. I wonder what you make. What was your reaction today when the Prime Minister seemed to perhaps sort of reset expectations around tariffs?
Well, we've known that things would intensify as we build into August 1st, and that's certainly something we're seeing last Friday, again today. Continuously over the last number of months, the U.S. strategy has seemed to be to keep us off our balance, to keep changing the rules, to weaponize uncertainty for business, and that certainly piles up and adds on to the damage and the disruption and the confusion. So we're not happy to see it. Unfortunately, it's almost to be expected at this point. And we do really hope to see the negotiations continue behind closed doors and out of the limelight as much as possible. It doesn't help the situation. It doesn't help the agreement.
Give us a sense. I mean, I think this is a shift in mindset. We've been talking about this as a shift of, sort of shifting the bar, resetting Canadians' expectations. But in terms of the range of what it could mean to say that there will still be some tariffs in place, how serious or how minor could that ultimately end up being?
Well, the current tariffs on certain sectors, steel, aluminum, auto parts, copper more recently, those are over time, those sorts of tariffs, that level of tariff will be crippling. It'll be incredibly damaging to those sectors, and those are key parts of the Canadian economy with key jobs and communities reliant on those. And so that is, over the longer term, damaging. On the other end of the spectrum, though, we've actually seen Canadians paying tariffs for market entry to the U.S. for many years under the most favored nation tariff rate of about 2.5%. In fact, many Canadian companies chose to pay that small amount of tariff rather than be fully CUSMA compliant, just because of the administrative burden, the paperwork, and the brokerages involved. And so, there is that trade-off that happens. What's important in trade is that it has to be seen as a relative factor. So the question for Canada will be, how competitive are we? What kind of privileged access do we have to the American market compared to others? With CUSMA right now, with the broad IEEPA tariffs that have been in place at 25% for non-compliant products, that's there. But if you're CUSMA compliant, you still have privileged access to the U.S. market. And so that's key for us, is what comes next. And there's multiple phases to this, I think. We have the immediate August 1st deadline and this buildup of pressure right now to try and diffuse this a bit, try to deal with some of this trade war. But what we'll have between now and October is the opening of the CUSMA review phase, and that will flow into 2026. And so we're likely to see some of this relitigated in certain ways over that period of time again. And so I think the Prime Minister today was probably signaling Canadians have to settle in for a little bit of time here. It's likely not going to be done in one go. We're not going to have this wrapped and ribboned on August 1st.
Are you saying then that if Canada has to swallow some tariffs in order to get a deal, that could still shift as the CUSMA negotiation happens? Is that the point that you're making?
Well, what's key is if CUSMA continues to give us that privileged access. So right now we see 25% across the board for non-compliant. That could go up to 35. We see sectoral tariffs under the 232 frame. So if we fall back to a relatively lower level, that's important. Of course, we all benefit most from a zero tariff situation, both the U.S. and Canadian businesses and consumers as well. And I think that's the other piece, is we have to remember that tariffs are ultimately a tax on the buyer. So they will be adding an inflationary pressure to the U.S. business environment and to the U.S. consumer. And that hasn't started to bite yet. We haven't seen that yet in the U.S. This week, the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, showed an uptick of 2.7%. That's the highest increase in the U.S. marketplace since January. So we're only just now beginning to see the earliest signs that there might be inflation happening. And until that starts to happen, we're not going to see a real pushback, I think, from the broader American public.
As we look at the broader international picture, the UK, their deal with the US had about a 10% tariff on most UK goods. What would something like that mean for Canada?
I think that's going to depend on the sector. And again, it's relative. So if everybody's facing 10%, then you've basically just increased the price of all goods in America. But if you're seeing differences where you're seeing, some countries paying 35% and others paying 5%, that's where you start to see a real competitive differential. Canadians are used to having a very savvy approach to trade. We also have a currency that usually is devalued against the American dollar, and that also assists us in our export markets. It can make things a little more costly on the import side. But if we see, for example, using the UK hypothetical, a 10% tariff, I think for certain industries that's going to be quite damaging. We're already seeing just this first few months of the tariff situation create a lot of disruption. We've seen Canadian exports to the US go down significantly just in the last couple of months. So I think we will see a real impact, and businesses are quite worried. What they need is certainty. What they need to know is, do we have a trade deal under CUSMA that we can gain privileged access to the US market? Highly integrated economies, they rely on things. I think the other piece here, just to add one more point, is that depending on what the industrial policy and priorities of the US administration are moving forward, they're absolutely going to need a ton of what Canada supplies them. We're the largest supplier of aluminum and steel for their manufacturing base. We provide a tremendous amount of copper to their marketplace. These are precisely the things, the areas they've targeted, auto parts as well.
Yeah.
So are they planning to build things? If they are, they need what we provide them. And if they need what we provide them, are they going to pay it at today's price, or are they going to pay it at tomorrow's with a premium on top of it? At the end of the day, it's going to be them paying it.
But perhaps implications for the sector nonetheless. Before we let you go, I do just want to ask you quickly, retaliation. It's not really something we have been talking about in a very focused way lately in Canada. Do you think that conversation, as we move closer to a deal where we may have to accept some level of tariffs, the retaliation conversation is over, or is that something Canada still needs to be thinking about at this point?
I don't think it's over, but I think the timing right now is very precarious, and we have to be very cautious about using something that would be inflammatory against the United States or be viewed that way in Washington. I think we need to proceed in good faith, behind closed doors, continue the goodwill discussions that I hope are taking place. The public spectacle aside that often comes from this presidency notwithstanding, I think we still stay the course and stay calm. But Canada has shown in the past that we are ready and willing to retaliate. Remember, we're only one of 2 countries that have currently put in place retaliatory tariffs on the US. So we've been quite bold in that respect already.
Okay. All of it, a lot of food for thought at a consequential time. Thank you very much for this. Matthew Holmes with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce.